it appears. As is usually the case, if you are actually seeing this live, please put something in the chat box. Tell me you can actually hear me. I think you should be able to. Good evening to you all. The purpose of today's live stream is a couple of things. One is I sort of want to do a general Q&A. I do these occasionally. So whatever questions come to mind, if it's something I've covered before, you think I should cover, basically anything that I normally talk about that you want something specific on, well, this is the time. Ask a question in the chat. And beyond that, I have a couple of things I kind of wanted to touch on, and there are a few here. I didn't think any of them had enough material in them for the entire live stream. Excellent. Paul tells me he can hear me. Thanks, sir. I appreciate it. I don't think any one of these topics is worth a separate dedicated live stream, live cast. But altogether, I think there's enough material here for me to talk about. So I've got a couple of things. One, I started looking at SunwayFoto tripod, shooting tripod. So that's item number one. Mr. Peter James from Australia, good day to you, sir. I keep on getting a lot of questions on what makes rifle scopes heavy versus light and how to make them lighter and all that. That is not something that you can just answer in a single sentence. But what I can talk about, if you guys are interested, is I sort of offer some general considerations, the types of things that make it harder or easier to put together a lightweight rifle scope. So that's topic number two. And what was the third one? I'm slowly but surely losing my mind. What else did I promise you guys? Anybody? Anybody at all? What was the third one? It'll come to me in a moment, I'm sure. Okay. But anyhow, so that's my plan. None of this is intended to be. None of this is really intended to be a lecture. So if any questions, anything comes to mind, just put it in the chat. And Mr. Rikambi is here. Thanks, sir. Put it in the chat, and I'll switch gears and talk about that. Okay. There we go. So what was my third and final topic I want to cover? Yes, scope mounts. 1913 versus STANAG scope mount patterns. And that actually makes a difference for how scope mounts work and how well they grab the rail and how well they will return to zero. And that's, you know what? Let's start with the scope mount stuff. Unless you guys have objections, let's do the scope mount business. So what is a Picatinny or STANAG? In fact, that scope mount, I had a rail somewhere here that I strategically brought with me and then left somewhere where I cannot see it. All right, I have no idea what I did with that thing, but you all presumably know what a rail looks like. I'm gonna go out on a limb and assume that you do. I'll be damned. I brought the whole tripod here with the rail and everything. The only other rail I have here is very firmly attached to something. All right, you'll just have to forgive me. Anyhow. Mr. Blind Spotter. Does your ancient 1712 eject properly? So it used to, and today it didn't, which is annoying the hell out of me. It ejects properly about 60-70% of the time, and the rest of the time the spent case gets extracted from the chamber and just lays there on top, does not come out the ejection port. So I did a little bit of research and found that people modify the extractor, thin it down a little bit, something like that. Since I'm not adventurous enough to just go and start hacking on anshots, I ordered about half hour ago. I actually ordered a couple of spare parts, spare ejector, spare extractor and cartridge holder, so that I could I'll do some surgery on them and see if I can make it work. At least that's my plan. We'll see how it goes. For those who haven't seen it, I started doing on occasion these YouTube shorts when I'm on the range, and there was one that went live about an hour ago. Talked about a Anshot 1712 I have that sits in a JRS stock. So the actual topic of the conversation was the JRS stock that I'm very, very impressed with. But Mr. Blind Spotter has correctly noted that the super fancy German Anshots is not exactly ejecting 100%, which is really annoying. Makes me think that I should have just gotten a Voodoo barreled action and dropped it into JRS stock. I have a Voodoo 17 HMR, 0 problems, and I don't think I've ever really heard of any sort of a consistent problems with the Voodoo 22s either. Anyhow, so what is a Picatinny rail? We'll all kind of know what it looks like, and I thought I had one on hand, but I do not. What clamps to a Picatinny rail kind of looks like this. This is an air attack mount, right? You have a cross slot. It's like a larger weaver, etc., and it holds onto it. However, not all clamps are created equal, and I am going to show you the difference. Right? So, okay, I'm going to share this image. Where is share? There you go. All right. Okay. So I'm going to show you a picture of a mount. This is something called the odd mount. Who can tell me whether this is the Picatinny Mill Standard 1913 or if this is the STANAG, STANAG, which is basically NATO standard, which would be, I think, 4964 or something like that. I think that's relevant. STANAG mount. Okay. Which one is it? Is it Mill Standard 1913 or STANAG? Any thoughts, anyone? I'll give it a sec. No one? 1913. Okay, Mr. Rick Hamby decided to take a guess. No, it's not. This is the STANAG standard. So the rail looks the same, but the way the clamp and the mount is built is different. And notice that in this picture, if you look at it, you see that the clamp grabs the rail on these bottom edges. So on the rail on the side, there are two angled flats. And this particular, the STANAG rail grabber, grabs it on the bottom and pulls the whole mount onto the top of the rail. Okay. Here is, I'm going to show you another picture of a different mount, and you will see the difference momentarily. Let's see if this works. No, that's not it. That's not it. It's not it. It's not it. I'll find the right picture momentarily. There you go. Okay. This is the 1913. If you look at this one, you will notice that, hold on. You will notice that on the edges here, it's making contact, but on the top, where there's this large flat surface, there is actually a gap. Tell me if you guys are able to see that reasonably well. So this is the Mill Standard 1913, which is basically the Picatinny standard. Remember, the rail is the same. Essentially, the clamp is different. Okay. Here is the reason. Here's where the differences are. It really comes down to how certain datum surfaces are defined. Okay. All right. So on the left is the 1913 interface. On the right is a NATO rail grabber interface. The 1913 standard basically defines 4 datum surfaces, right? Basically these 4 small angle surfaces. And there is a fundamental problem there. Unless your machining is done perfectly, absolutely perfectly, it is impossible for all 4 surfaces to be making contact. When you're trying to define a particular interface, what you want, if you want consistent contact, you want to define 3 contact points. Essentially, that's how you define a plane in geometry, stuff like that, right? 3 interface points is what you can do consistently, okay? 4, you cannot. If the machining is even slightly imperfect, even marginally slightly imperfect, one of the surfaces is not going to touch, okay? Depending on how imperfect the machining is, the rail is a little bit undersized, oversized, or whatever else, you may have other problems, right? The surfaces may not be perfectly angled, so the contact may be inconsistent. The angle may be slightly off, and I've seen that one. And that's where, when you close the clamp, it starts compressing the sharp edge, this pointy thing on one of the sides on the rail. And one of the things that happens with an interface like this, as you tighten the clamp, the point of aim of the rifle scope starts changing. Okay. Very, very good analogy. I got to put this up, Mr. Rick Hamby. 3-legged stool versus a chair on the floor, exactly. Have you ever seen a 3-legged stool wobble? Okay, doesn't happen very much. Can I design a 3-legged stool that wobbles? Yeah, not easily. But anyhow, you need 3 contact surfaces really to do this well. Now you still have to have stuff machined correctly if you want, compared to a large area within each contact surface to make contact and all that sort of stuff. It still needs to be a very nicely machined interface. But with 3 contact points, which is what you have with the NATO rail, the one that's on the right, with 3 contact surfaces, you're not demanding perfection. You need to be within a certain spec for things to be consistent. It does have to be perfect. And what the NATO rail does, it engages these 2 little surfaces that are on the side and the bottom, the 45-degree surfaces that are pointing down. And as the clamp squeezes on those 2 surfaces, the mount is actually ended up being pulled down and referencing on the top of the rail. Okay, the long surface marked in red, that's on top of the rail. That creates for a much more consistent interface. So when I look at various mounts, the moment they get into my hands, the first thing that I look at when I look at them is this a STANAG interface, or if this is a mil standard 1913. If it is the 1913 interface, I'm going to try to use this. And there are some very, very nice mounts, like the one you saw in the picture is actually a Geissele mount, which is a nice mount. And they made it with a 1913 clamp, not because they don't understand why 4 surfaces don't work, because they were making that mount for some US military's contract. And the knuckle dragger who defined that, somewhere in there, asked for specifically 1913 spec amount. And I once had this discussion with some guy in Sniper's Hide who worked with the military, and he was very offended when I said that the 1913 interface as defined is just stupid and that NATO is much better. But he couldn't really come up with a good argument why 1913 as defined with 4 datum surfaces is a good idea. I have a few mounts here, right, on hand. For example, the one I was showing you earlier, this is a slope mount air attack. And if you look at it, basically, if you just look at the clamp, you can immediately see that this is a NATO interface because it's clearly designed to have a gap at, like 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock positions. So this is likely to be returning to 0 on well-machined rails pretty well. SunwayFoto that I mentioned earlier, I'm going to talk a little bit about their tripod. They also started making mounts and rings, right? So I got a couple of rings and I got a mount. I haven't really looked at the rings very carefully, but I looked at the mount. When you look at it, I don't know if you guys can see it. It's readily apparent that this is actually 1913. Now, SunwayFoto is a photo company. I don't know how much they know about shooting and mounts and all that sort of stuff. So it's entirely possible they just assume that mil standard 1913 is what they should be doing. When I first started talking about this, and it's been a few years, I even wrote an article on this for Guns and Ammo a couple of years ago. I think it's in 2020. I was surprised with how many very experienced gun people don't know the difference, and why with some mounts and some rails, when you start tightening this thing and it's not quite making contact, and if you pay attention carefully, you start seeing this. I'm going to exaggerate the motion. Starts out straight, and as you tighten this a little bit, the mount starts tilting a little bit, right? Because of this interface where you cannot have four surfaces make contact. While with a NATO style clamp, as you tighten this, all you're doing is you're just pressing it down. At some point, it comes to a fairly consistent reference position. What other rings do I have here? I have a Burris mount. This is their single piece mount. This one I actually can't easily tell. It might be 1913, might be a STANAG. I need to look carefully. I have a March wide ring that used to come with the shorter scopes. This is clearly STANAG. And as you look at this thing, right, just the shape of the clamp, you can fairly clearly see which surfaces it is designed to engage. Mr. Ball Infinity, yes. Was that an air attack mount a moment ago? Yes, it is. This is the air attack adjust the slope mount. Okay. Why, you have any questions about it? It's a very nice mount. I'm quite happy with it. Where was I? What else do I have here? Of course, the Picatinny rail I was looking for earlier was behind me this whole time. This is another SunwayFoto product. Turns out one of the things that they make is an arca plate with an integrated Picatinny rail on top. And in front, it's actually double Picatinny here, so you can attach it to things that require that. Very clever, useful thing if you want to put your rifle scope in a tripod and use it as a spotter. It's not very called SPA 180. Actually, not sure how much it costs. I'll tell you right now. It was not very expensive. Now, all the SunwayFoto stuff is made in China, so take it for what you will. They're $40. There are some US-made ones that I think in the $80 range. I think I've seen somebody talk about these on a hide. This one's Chinese, costs $40. I will not judge you if you buy a Chinese one. Similarly, I will not judge you if you refuse to buy a Chinese one. Entirely up to you. But anyhow, that's the Picatinny rail. Let's see if I can, using the air attack mount, can simulate this condition that I'm looking for. Okay. All right, see, and if I clamp this, and I'm going to try to show it to you. I don't know. You guys tell me if you can see it on the camera. Well, this one's not so easy to see, right? But if you're looking through this, you probably can't see easily. If you're looking through this, it's clear which surfaces are making contact. So that's something you can always look at when you buy a new mount. Pay attention to this kind of stuff. With 1913 type interface, it's not like they don't work, right? For most in-spec clamps and in-spec rails, they work just fine, right? Geissele, for example, so they have this mount that how did I do it? Oh, I gave it to a friend of mine who was really helpful to me in Alaska, so I sent him a scope in that mount. He puts it on, doesn't remove it, right? So if you use a Geissele rail with Geissele mount, Geissele makes these amazingly precise Picatinny rails. Yeah, I would not anticipate any issues. Once things start going out of spec, your possibility of a tolerance stack up is much higher with a 1913 style interface that requires those four datum surfaces. Okay. Mr. Ball Infinity. I'm glad you like those, as I bought a few of them. Yeah, I'm quite happy with them. I mean, they're expensive. I don't want to buy a few of them. This one I traded the guy for something. Don't remember what it was. So I got it to play with. Originally, my plan was to use it with the Zeiss LRP S5 rifle scope. But because of this whole adjust the slope type thing, if you look at this, it's a 34 millimeter mount. The spacing from the bottom of the rings to this flat here is not very high. And the turret box on those Zeiss rifle scopes is so large that I could not really could not mount that scope in this mount at all. I ended up using it for a few other things, and now I'm actually considering using it on a precision rimfire so I can dial in a lot of slope. So I have a couple ideas what I can do with it. Oh, by the way, as usual, whoever figures out what I'm drinking gets a free t-shirt. Okay, to be more specific, whoever figures out what I'm drinking in this glass gets a free t-shirt. If you correctly guess what I'm drinking out of this thermos cup, there are no brownie points. Just saying. All right, where was I? Yeah, so to wrap up the whole STANAG versus 1913, it's not like 1913 interface doesn't work. It works perfectly fine most of the time. When I made these experiments, it's harder to get a tolerance stack up with the Railgrabber STANAG interface. So if I have a situation where I'm going to be removing the mount a lot, I try to stick with STANAG. You can do it with 1913, you just have to be careful and you have to test very thoroughly, etc. With decent quality, decently well-made STANAG interfaces, I never have problems with the torque range. They'll come back just fine. Mr. Luco Lasco says Diet Coke. Are you suggesting that I'm fat? No, it's not offensive. It's minimally observant. No, it's not Diet Coke. Weirdly, I actually don't drink any sodas of any sort, diet or regular ones. All right, before I move on, any questions or concerns, any clarifications that you think would be helpful on the business of different rail clamps, whether 1913 or STANAG? Lol, negative. I'm not sure what's negative here, but okay. Yeah, if you try to fat shame me, I'm going to have a lot of fun with it, and nobody's going to be particularly ashamed of themselves. You're drinking liquids of a non-lethal character. That depends on quantities. I remember those days back in college when it's got pretty close to being lethal. At least next morning I thought I was going to die, but I clearly survived. Okay. Mr. Blind Spotter. So I am, let's see, different face. I'm trying to figure out how to put a banner here. Don't see it. Okay, I'm gonna say it. You'll have to figure it out. Shoot me an email at swag, SWAG, at darklordofoptics.com. All one word, swag at darklordofoptics.com. If you are in the United States somewhere, I'll send you a Dark Lord of Optics t-shirt. Tell me what your size is. That's just funny. Negative on the diet insult assumptions. Everybody's so sensitive these days. I was just having fun with you. All right. Paul M. Good explanation. Thank you, sir. I hope it makes sense. Okay. Before I move on, to reiterate, what I'm looking for here, I'm not saying that one clamp is perfect, another one is crap. If badly Manufactured, etc., either one of them can be absolute crap. And if well manufactured, everything in spec, both of them work just fine. What I'm trying to do with mounts is play the odds, essentially. I get to yield a lot of, I get to yield. I get to address a lot of different questions that people ask about a variety of things. A lot of them come from the standpoint my scope is not holding zero, my mount is crap, yada, yada, yada. Most of the questions where the scope is not holding zero, something doesn't work, are user error. And all those user errors, easily 70%, come down to scope mounting. And with scope mounting, there are not really that many things to screw up other than choose the wrong mount, tighten it too much, not tighten it enough, make contact with the turret box. There are a few things to look for. We all have kind of conditioned ourselves at this stage to figure out more or less what to look for. The clamp itself does not seem to get a ton of mileage. Okay? So I'm basically trying to raise awareness a little bit. So the problems you're having with your mount may come down to the clamp, right? And if between the 1913 and STANAG interfaces, the probability of having an issue is higher with the 1913. Okay. So if I am trying to sort of play the odds, minimize chances of having an issue, I will try to stick between the two with the STANAG mount. And it becomes especially important if this is a gun optic combination where you think you may be removing it and reinstalling it with reasonable regularity and expecting it to come back to zero. It's much easier with STANAG. Okay. All right. I think I've beaten this one to death. I can have a sip of coffee. And we'll move on to the next one. All right, guys. So I have two other marginally pre-prepared topics. One is SunwayFoto stuff that I've sort of touched on a little bit. And another is lightweight rifle scopes. What makes them heavy, light, etc. Some general considerations. Where should I go next? Going once, going twice, going a third time. Okay. Nobody has an opinion. Hey, I'll take it. All right. Since nobody has an opinion, let's talk a little bit about SunwayFoto. So, general disclaimer. To date, I've spent. Okay, all right, Mr. Pazazzi Morano, who I haven't seen in a while, bought a Steiner S35 on blowout. Yes. So, best that I can tell, Steiner is preparing to release a Gen 2 of their thermals. And that means that the Gen 1, which is what you purchase, Gen 1 that you purchased is basically at the deal of a century, I think, from downrange thermal, something like that. You are able to get, or were able to get, I don't know if they still have them, Steiner S35 thermal scope for less than $3,000. It's an amazing price. I really like the S35. I think the imaging performance is excellent. It's a little bit bulky, a little bit heavy. So with the S35, I prefer the dedicated scope to the clip-on, although generally speaking, for my personal use, I prefer clip-ons on scopes kind of like this, as a tracked 1-8. Something like this with a clip-on is awesome. But with Steiner, because they're a little bit bulky, a little bit heavy, I do prefer the standalone scope, and it has a larger battery capacity. Imaging performance is competitive with pretty much anything with the same, resolution lens configuration out there, and under $3,000, it's a steal. Oh, there we go. So he got it for $2,300 after rebate. Yeah, that's basically highway rubber. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. From Paul. Could you make a 1913 mount behave more like a STANAG mount by placing a shim on top of the rail to take up some of the slack. In theory, yes. But in practice, you will also minimize somewhat the contact on those bottom diagonal surfaces. So if you really wanted to, you could. But remember, the idea with the STANAG is the biggest reason is that it's going to be much more repeatable. So unless you have identified that you have an out-of-spec rail or something like that, I probably wouldn't go through any real exertions in terms of trying to do it. And then you run into an issue that you need a very, very consistent shim to be able to do that. That's not compressible. That's not going to cause other issues, stuff like that. Is it possible? Yes. Would I want to mess with it? Probably not. Me personally, probably not. It would be an interesting experiment, I think. Okay. All right, Mr. Brad Barnes said, let's talk about lightweight scopes first. Okay. It's all the same to me, so let's talk a little bit about lightweight scopes. So how did this one start? I posted on my website, and if you guys, if you haven't seen my website, it's at darklordofoptics.com. That's sort of my home on the internet. That's where I spend most of my time. I posted that I am going to be looking at the Blackhound Emerge 2 to 12 by 44. It's the higher end product line from Blackhound. These are the Japanese made scopes, made, I believe, by Japan Optics Limited, I think. And I saw them at shot, and I thought they kind of looked pretty good. And it so happens that the configuration, that's 2 to 12 front focal plane, for me is very interesting. There are several good reasons for that. And the basic reason is that, so the general purpose hunting scope used to be 3 to 9 by 40, 2.5 to 10 by 42, something like that. Well, we now have higher erector ratio systems. So this semi-standard hunting scope for a little bit of everything has sort of become 3 to 15, 3 to 18, stuff like that. However, as time goes on, and because of this whole thermal revolution that's happening right now, I am finding myself using thermal clip-ons more and more and more and more. And it just so happens that most commercially available thermal clip-ons have the field of view that is approximately equivalent to most day scopes that are in about roughly equivalent to approximately 2x day scope magnification ballpark. Some a little bit higher, some a little bit lower, but approximately 2x. So what happens is that many hunting scopes that I like so much, for example, my favorite hunting rifle, well, for now, that may be changing. I have two favorite hunting rifles, right? One of them has a Vortex Razor DLHT 4.5 to 22 by 50, and another one has a Tangent Theater TT, the M model, the 3 to 15 by 50, right? 4.5 on the low end makes mating it with a commercially available thermal clip-ons kind of tricky. Most of them have wider field of view, so you're losing a lot of information. You're looking in the center. From an aiming standpoint, it's not bad, but what you lose quite frequently is that oftentimes the menus are somewhere on the side. So you're looking through a scope, even on lowest magnification, you're trying to make an adjustment of some sort, you can't see the menus or see bits and snippets and all that. So for the day scopes that are intended to be used with clip-ons, I really like to have the low-end magnification in a 2x or lower, right? I plan to test the Delta Titanium HD 1.5 to 9 by 45. They have a new version that I haven't tested yet, so I plan to play with it a good bit. And one of the big reasons I like it is that it could be the ultimate pig scope. Why do I say that? Well, it's 1.5 to 9 by 45, so it has a good size objective. It is very good in low light. I've played with the Gen 1 of that scope. It was very, very good. It has nice illumination, all that sort of stuff. And because it goes down to 1.5, it should also play exceptionally well with all sorts of commercial clip-ons. Okay, Mr. Rick Hamby's basically goes, yes. My hunting optic was a 1.5 to 6 by 42 Zeiss. Correct. That was sort of the nearly standard configuration for many, many years for situations where you're not going to be shooting 800 yards, right? Although, to be fair, 6 power you can shoot pretty far out, but then again, I'll freely admit, if I'm shooting on an animal sufficiently far, I have a fairly steady position, all that, I would prefer to have a little bit more magnification. Well, 1.5 to 6 scopes, they still kind of exist, but not too much. We've sort of gone up to, okay, Rick goes southeast United States, exactly. You're not going to have 600-yard shots there very much. We've gone to higher erector ratios, and I've been looking at this, and most modern scopes don't start out that low. Delta makes a 1.5 to 9 by 45. GPO, German Precision Optics, they make a 1.5 to 9 by 32 and 1.5 to 9 by 44, which I have not tested. I've looked at them briefly. They seem good, and I should probably actually get 1.5 to 9 by 44 from them and compare it against the Delta, now that I think about it. Leopold, Vortex used to make a 1.5 to 8 by 32 HDLH. I still have 2 of those scopes, and I think they're wonderful. If they had an illuminated dot, it'd be even better. But they're really, really nice. But scopes that go down to 1.5 are nearly ideal to use with clip-ons. However, if you're shooting without a clip-on, they still tend to have a larger objective lens, so that even with when you're hunting without a clip-on, you have reasonable low light performance, right? Low power variables, of course, also again bringing up the tracked 1 to 8 by 24, which is really, really nice scope. They play amazingly well with clip-ons, but without a clip-on, with a 24mm objective, low light performance is better than you'd think. It's still much better than a naked eye and all that. Go dial it down to like 3-4 power. It's actually quite nice. But it is really better if you can squeeze in a larger objective. And the catch is, the reason why the low power variables have small objectives is that you need to go down to 1 power, which makes larger objectives very difficult. Difference between 1 power and 1.5 is very significant. It's 50%. Magnification is multiplicative, right? So when your lower magnification is 1.5 power, you actually can build scopes with large objectives that work really well in low light all by themselves. Okay, but anyhow, that's really why I wanted to look at the Black Hunt 2 to 12 by 44, because it's front focal plane. It has a 3 reticle, but it's competitively sparse 3 reticle, so it should work well as sort of a crossover hunting scope that you can do a lot of things with, and you can also go down on low magnification and use it with a clip-on. However, the scope weighs, I think, somewhere between 28 and 30 ounces. And when I posted that on my website, one of the subscribers there kind of asked, well, how come it is so heavy? Do they not, meaning manufacturers, do not understand how much more successful, much more attractive, perhaps, the scope would be if it was a little bit lighter? It would be. But the catch is that building lightweight front focal plane scopes is not so easy. And there are several good reasons for that. Before I get into that, I think there's a question here that I missed. Your favorite optics for clip-on thermals? Well, that actually kind of feeds into the discussion I was just having. So there are quite a few, and a lot depends on how you use the gun overall. So whether you want front focal plane, second focal plane, etc. Most of the scopes that go down to 1.5 are second focal plane designs. On the higher end, there is March 1.5 to 15 by 42, which is really excellent. So, and others, and not a lot of front focal plane scopes that go down to 1.5, and not all that many that go down to 2x either, which is why I really wanted to look at this Black Hound emerge. And the catch is that Vortex actually makes in the PST Gen 2 product line, they make it 2 to 10 by 32, but it's like 27 ounces also. And if I'm carrying something that heavy, I would prefer to have a larger objective. Okay. Another thing to keep in mind is that if you're putting a rifle scope behind a thermal clip-on, you don't want it to be too long. You want to be able to reach the clip-on. You don't want all that much weight up front, because now you have total weight of a rifle scope and a clip-on. What was I? I went with S35 over C35 because I did not have the understanding behind selecting a good 308 scope that would work well with it. I'll be happy to make a recommendation, but you need to tell me more about how you plan to use this rifle overall, with and without a clip-on. Okay. Anyhow, what makes a rifle scope heavy? There is a common misconception there. People are walking around saying, oh, my favorite rifle scope has a tube that's thicker and I'm sacrificing more weight, but it's making it more rugged. It does make it more rugged. You are sacrificing a little bit of weight, but really not that much, because aluminum in the scope tube is really, really light. Most of the weight in a rifle scope does not come from the main tube. The main tube itself is a very, very minor contributor to the weight, right? Because when you're done machining it, whether the wall thickness is 2 millimeters or 4 millimeters or something between, and that's probably where most of them fall, it doesn't make that much difference. What's heavy? Well, the glass is heavy, partly because glass is generally heavy, partly because there's a lot of glass in there, especially with modern rifle scopes. There are quite a few lens elements. I remember I had a diagram of a older hand-sold photo 16x56 somewhere, and I've showed it to you guys in the past many times over. And for that scope, I think the objective lens assembly alone is, I think, 7 or 8 elements total in a scope. I think it was 16 or 18, something like that. And every piece of glass, aside from its own weight, also needs to be held. And the larger it is, the heavier it is, the beefier is the mounting system, whichever way you're attaching it there, so it doesn't shift, doesn't move under recoil, that kind of stuff. Okay. So what makes you have a heavier scope versus a lighter scope? The biggest contributor is how many lens elements you have and how heavy they are. Everything else kind of drives from there. What makes you have many lens elements? Well, more complicated designs, by and large, right? What is more complicated designs? High erector ratios. So that's kind of complicated. If we are trying to make a design very short, okay, glass lenses are just semi-transparent rocks. It's an interesting way of looking at this. Haven't heard that one yet. Okay. What was I? If you're trying to make scope very short without sacrificing other things, you will be adding glass lens elements to it. A good example of that would be Sig Sauer Tango 6. The first generation Tango 6 3-18x44 was a pretty long scope. It still exists in the form of Trigicon 10 mile 3-18x44, but it was, I think, under 30 ounces, and it was comparatively lightweight. When Sig went to Gen 2, they wanted the scope to be short, and they made it a lot shorter. I think it was less than 12 inches, probably maybe closer to 10, something like that. And it ended up also 3-18x44, and it ended up gaining, I think, 10 or 12 ounces of weight in the process. It ended up being 38, 39 ounces. Okay, it was a nice scope, but it was heavy. You can make a short scope that is for the same comparatively high magnification range and all that, that is comparatively light, but then you'll be sacrificing some optical performance. If you don't want to sacrifice optical performance and you still want it comparatively light, one of the possibilities, you can use a more sophisticated lens system that uses unusual exotic glass materials, stuff like that. That's one of the things that March does really well. And what that allows you to do, it allows you to use thinner, frequently, not always, thinner lens elements, right? So if you use some sort of simple, commonly available glass, and you use successive lens elements to correct for imperfections that the element before it introduced and all that, that's basically what happens with the scope. You have one lens, right, in objective. And that does something, but it also introduces some sort of distortion. So you put a second lens in there to correct for the distortion of the first lens, introduced a few of its own. And the third lens goes in of a very particular shape and all that, that does some other thing, plus tries to correct the problems brought on by the previous two lenses and so on, right? So that's kind of how we go through the lens train. If you start with a more perfect lens, which could have more complicated geometry, let's say aspherical lenses that are comparatively harder to manufacture, and if some of your corrective elements are made of, for example, extra low dispersion glass, which is one of the reasons that came about, you may end up with a smaller number of lenses, but each lens element is more expensive, right? So you start running into issues. You know how there is a expression, you can have it good, cheap, or in manufacturing, let's say good, cheap, and fast. Pick 2 out of 3. That's sort of how it works, right? You can have it good, you can have it high performing, you can have it inexpensive, right? You cannot have all 3, at least not now. To be fair, high quality designs from an optical standpoint getting cheaper all the time, so we are going toward them being comparatively less expensive, inflation adjusted. But still, I mean, if you want everything, it's going to cost you some money. And weight is really with lightweight, even at higher price, you still don't have too much because it's just hard. And I'll touch on a couple other things in the meantime. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Mr. Pazazzi Morano, going back to clip-ons for a moment. I don't have too much of a purpose, just having fun diving into thermal. If you're just having fun and you don't have too much purpose, just pick a light, low power variable of some sort that you happen to like, and they play exceptionally well with clip-ons. Just make sure everything is lined up and go for it. Okay. Once again, tracked 1 to 8, around 1,000 is really excellent. If you are not going too far, meaning you're okay with second focal plane reticle. If you want to go front focal plane, size 6, primary arms, PLXC is excellent. If you go higher up, there are a few other really good options. Okay. I think my end goal is a $6.5 rifle for wild hogs and pest control with clip-on. Interestingly, I actually have a $6.5 just for that purpose, and it does have a low power variable on it because I have no intention of using it for hunting at night without a thermal clip-on. If you remind me, I'll show some pictures later. Where was I? Yeah, lightweight scope. So what else makes a scope heavy? Well, going back on it, right? So to make a scope heavy, you need large lens elements. You need a lot of them. What particular characteristic of an optical design usually necessitates large number of fairly large size optical elements? The requirements for field of view. If you want a wide field of view with long eye relief, you're going to end up with a pretty porky scope. Okay? Because what it does, not only does it require a comparatively complicated objective lens assembly, meaning, so if you think about a conventional scope, let me grab something. What do I have here? Oh, there we go. So this is a Vortex Venom 5 to 25 by 56. Okay. So let's remove this thing. Just as a reminder, from here to here, this is the objective lens assembly. This is the erector lens assembly. This is the eyepiece. Okay. So if you're trying to make this thing short or trying to make this in wide field of view, the objective lens assembly starts getting pretty complicated. You'll end up with quite a few lenses in there because that wide field of view, the light needs to be guided in a particular way. Distortions need to be controlled. The resolution and contrast need to be maintained. Wide field of view makes all of that more difficult. But what it also causes, the wider the field of view, the larger, all else being equal, assuming the same objective focal, the larger do you have are the lenses in the erector system. Because with a wide field of view design, the spot in the front focal plane is fairly large, and you need large lenses in the erector system to pick that spot up and render it accurately, once again, without distortion, with good resolution, all that sort of stuff. And if that is the case, if you pick a fairly large spot there and you want a fairly long eye relief and wide field of view, you will also end up with a fairly large eyepiece. If you can sacrifice some field of view, if you can sacrifice some eye relief, and you can have a small eyepiece, and saves a lot of weight. So probably the lightest variable scope available today is this little SWFA ultralight 2.5 to 10 by 32. And just to show you, here's the size of the eyepiece. Okay, you see the difference? This scope is under 10 ounces. It's very, very lightweight. And it's a nice scope, actually. And field of view is not bad. It's kind of mid-pack. The reason they're able to do it is that it's designed for ARs and stuff like that. The eye relief is not very long, right? So if you see where my eye is, it should be in about 2.5 inches range, something like that. And with a larger eyepiece with this scope, here it is, right? You notice that the eye relief is significantly longer. With a shorter eye relief, you can get away with a shorter eyepiece and all the rest of the stuff, and that can be a little bit shorter, but still, if you are requiring a wide field of view, it can't be too short. It can't be too small, right? You will still end up with a comparatively beefy design. Given all that, how do you make a lightweight rifle scope? Honestly, just by careful design, right? You have to think that you want it to be lightweight from fairly early on. Where was I? Yeah. You want it lightweight from fairly early on, okay? And then you have to think about what else you want. You have to kind of understand what kind of performance you can get out of it, give that to the engineering team, and then have them figure out what they can get away with. For example, the lightest high quality and robust and well-performing optically front focal plane rifle scope around right now with good magnification range is 4.5 to 22 by 50 Vortex Razor DLHT that I talk about so much. They did several things there to try to keep the weight low. Well, the one thing is that the field of view is not super wide. Now, it's not narrow either. It's kind of mid-pack, perfectly respectable, but not super wide. They didn't try to make it super wide. With that, the scope is not an ultra short. Now, it's not long. It's sort of on the shorter side of average for the magnification range, but they did not try to go super exotic there. That allowed them to keep the objective lens assembly reasonably well optimized and not super complicated. I looked at it a little bit. It's actually complicated enough. It's a nice design, but they didn't have to add an ungodly number of lens elements there just to correct that, right? Then the next thing they did is said, okay, this is sort of a long-range hunting scope. How much internal range of adjustment do you really need, right? And it turns out you don't need all that much. In practical terms, if it's a sort of a crossover scope, once you've zeroed, if you're careful, if you have 10 to 15 milliradian of adjustment, you're fine. And what the Razor HDLHT does is that it basically 18 milliradian is available internally, and once you set the zero stop, you get 12. Well, 12 basically gets you through eight out to 1,000 yards or so, or 6.5 Creed and stuff like that. Gets you out quite a bit further, and you're golden. Eye relief on that scope is perfectly reasonable, about 3.5 inches. And if you're going to be putting this thing on a lightweight mountain rifle, you won't have a little bit of eye relief. But they didn't try to push it to anything crazy. They didn't try to stick it with a 5-inch eye relief, anything like that. 3 to 3.5 is really more than enough for almost anything, unless you're shooting some absolute cannon or something like that. But if you're going uphill with a 7-pound rifle that's chambered for, 6.5 PRC, I mean, it's going to have some movement to it, right? So you don't want the eye relief to be too short. So designing a lightweight rifle scope sort of becomes an exercise in compromise. You have to think about it carefully, and you have to figure out what you want to compromise on and what you don't want to compromise on, right? I hope this is making sense. I see there are a couple of questions there. I'll address that in a moment once I'm done with my speech. Lastly, if you look at a lot of designs, you notice that front focal plane designs tend to be a little bit on the heavier side than second focal plane designs. And there is a reason for it, because in the front focal plane design, the reticle is sitting in the front focal plane. If the image delivered by the objective lens is imperfect, has curvature, whatever else, you are kind of screwed. You will see all of that. Okay, so the objective lens design starts getting a little bit more complicated, and that snowballs into somewhat more complicated director system design as well. If your reticle is in a second focal plane, you have a lot more opportunities to correct a couple of things here and there, and you could potentially have an optically somewhat simpler design. The difference is not that huge, but since front focal plane scopes also come more from the tactical end of things, where they also tend to have larger turrets and more adjustment range and all that sort of jazz, they tend to be a little bit heavier. If you rethink the whole adjustment range business and how you do the turrets and all that, it is perfectly possible to make a front focal plane scope that's fairly lightweight. Clearly possible. Vortex did it, and I assume other people will as well. But it's sort of a lesson that the industry is learning embarrassingly slowly, I think. Right. I'm going to address a couple of questions that are in there momentarily. Tell me if this whole thing about what makes a scope, what makes it easy to make a lightweight scope, if it all makes sense to you. And if not, I can try to clarify the best I can. All right. What do we have? Okay, Mr. Blind Spotter. Seems to be that longer eye relief has more cons than pros, but all brands seem to try and maximize it. One of those specs that sells scopes, maybe. Yeah, so the long eye relief originally was a Leupold thing. So Leupold didn't want to design, or couldn't, or didn't want to, whatever. But traditionally, many Leupold scopes had long eye relief, and they had eye relief that varied very significantly with magnification. Many still do, actually. And it got quite a bit longer on low power, although it was quite forgiving, which is nice. It's another thing is that if your field of view is a little bit narrow, it's easy to make the eye relief forgiving, the eye box larger. And Leupold ran a very successful campaign of how you need very long eye relief is not to get smacked in the eye with a rifle scope and all sort of stuff. There was some truth to it. You need some length of eye relief, right? So you don't want to be right behind the scope. There are some quote unquote zero, very, very short eye relief scopes out there, primarily designed for stuff that doesn't kick, air guns, stuff like that. And there are many optical advantages to short eye relief. From an optical standpoint, short eye relief is much, much better, much easier to work with, much easier to optimize and all that. But kick is kick. You need some eye relief. Most modern high-quality scopes have eye relief that is consistent with magnification. It's in about 3 to 3.5 inch range. And when I say eye relief, in this case, I don't mean the distance to the rear lens elements. That's what's always in the specs. I'm talking about the distance to the last aluminum thing, because when you get hit in the eye with that thing, it's not going to be the lens, it's going to be the eyepiece housing. All right, and if you look at them, for almost every scope, the lens, I don't know if you guys can see it well, the lens is very slightly recessed. Not by much, but 1/4 inch is very typical. Okay. But you're right. It's one of those things that does sell scopes, and if you have an application without much recoil, long eye relief does not really do all that much for you unless you need it for a mounting reason. Some rifles you can't easily mount a scope with eye relief, is too short. Okay. Okay, Mr. Pazazi Miranda. ACOG eye relief is so bad I can't run backup iron sights behind it. You must have the 4x32 ACOG. Yeah, that one was famous for having crappy eye relief. So I don't have the ACOG here, but just to show people who are not hugely familiar with it, I think I have the Mepro 4X here somewhere, which is essentially the same optical design. What the hell did I do with it? I found the box. I don't see the actual scope. Oh, there it is. I see it. Never mind. Give me 1 sec. I see it. Okay. So this is a Mapro X4. It's now discontinued. It's a 4x32. It's an optical, essentially a ripoff of the ACOG. I don't know if it's licensed or not, or they just copied it. It's made in Israel. So SWFA 2.5 to 10 by 32 ultralight. This has a comparatively short eye relief, but I've had it on fairly light 308 class rifles without any issues. I use these as backup scopes because they're durable and very decent and weigh very little. So this is the eye relief, right? So roughly fingers now. This is same eye relief as on a 4x32 ACOG that Mr. Pazazzi Marano is talking about. Put this on something with recoil, you'll get hit. Israelis who don't like getting hit in the eye, put this rubberized thing on it, so at least you don't get hit with aluminum, which I do appreciate to a significant degree. Now, on many rifles without too much recoil, many ARs, this actually works okay. And if you're not running, and in terms of eye relief flexibility or not, it's not bad. It's perfectly usable. This particular one is not very light, but it has nice wide field of view. I actually like this with a clip-on. So this frequently lives on my 6.5 Grendel with a clip-on right in front of it, mounted on the flat top of the upper receiver. Okay. All right, Mr. Lee Tintle hasn't been here in a long time. It's good to see you, sir. My apologies for the long absence from the live stream. Don't mention it. I've typed 3 questions on a lightweight topic since you started talking, but you answered them. More articulate questions to follow well. I'll take that as a compliment. Thank you. All right, have a couple more. Interesting. What do you think about tech integration into scopes, making them heavier? Well, it depends on what integration you're talking about. If you're talking about something like reticle elimination, stuff like that, that may add an ounce or something. And for me, that's worth it, right? I really like having an eliminated reticle if it's well done. If you're talking about ballistic computers or stuff like that, that definitely adds more weight. But if you're doing long range, serious long range stuff, it's probably worth it. It's a nice thing. Now, how these are going to be integrated in the future, how much weight it's going to take, not all of that is sort of an open question, so we don't know for sure. I'd like to see how they work it out. So far, one of the better integrations I've seen is probably Steiner IFS system, which I really liked. Although there have been a couple of others that are actually quite good. I think what are they called? My memory is not with me today. So SIG's been pushing it quite thoroughly. Revic's probably one of the smoother integrations. There are quite a few. So the new stuff for the military, like Vortex's XM157 scope, clearly lots of integration. It adds to the weight, but the big thing is that there you have to look at it from a system level approach, right? So if you're integrating it into the scope package, are you saving anything from the other stuff you maybe would have had to carry with you? Right? So it's not necessarily a simple argument. If it gives me extra functionality and I don't have to, for example, laser rangefinder integrated into a rifle scope. Some applications I prefer a standalone one. For many, LRF is the most natural thing to integrate into a rifle scope. If it makes my scope 5 ounces heavier, but I don't have to carry a separate LRF with me, I think that's worth it, right? So it really comes down to what exactly you're talking about. Okay, that's an interesting question. How much of a low light, low mag trade-off would I be making with the March 4.5 to 28 versus the Z-Comp 4 to 20? Good question. The image is darker, but I was still able to aim with the March. It is a smaller exit pupil. You will see it. It doesn't mean you'll be blind in the dark, but it is a measurable difference. As much as I like the March 4.5 to 28, it's not designed to be a low light scope. A low light Z-Comp is better. During the day, Z-Comp is a very nice scope. I don't know if I prefer it to the March or not. That's a tougher question. I like the magnification range of the March, and it has a wider field of view when on the same magnification. I think March on 4.5 has actually more field of view than Z-Comp on 4. But if your application is low light hunting, March 4.5 to 28 is usable, but not ideal. All right, Mr. Lee Tintle. Theoretically, what would be your ideal configuration for a lightweight general purpose optic on an AR platform for anything up to $6.5 grand? It's a good question. It comes down to whether you're talking about single optic or whether you're talking about the system overall. For example, if thermal clip-on is an option, then I don't have to worry too much about low light performance, right? No matter how wonderful your day scope is with a great objective diameter and all that sort of stuff, put a decent thermal clip-on in front of it, and it's going to be much better in low light, and it's not close. For shooting things at night, thermal is head and shoulders above it in terms of effectiveness, head and shoulders above what you can get with any day scope. If you are talking about thermal is out of the question, honestly, comparatively lightweight 3 to 15 by 50 or something like that is actually a very nice general purpose scope. I probably prefer 3 to 15 by 42 front focal plane, maybe even by 36, depends on how much low light you need, and set it up with an offset red dot. And you can do that for a little bit of everything, right? But on the other hand, if a thermal is part of the equation, then I'll just stick with the low power variable, which is what I have on my 6.5 grand at the moment. Why? Because modern low power variables like a primary arms PLX-C, they are short, they're lightweight, the optical performance is very good, they're very fast on 1 power. 8 time magnification is enough for me for a lot of things. Oh, there's 1 to 10. I have the Razor Gen 3, which is excellent. I spend a lot of time on my Grendel. The weakness of a low power variable is low light because of the smallish objective, but once a thermal clip-on is in play, then that's really not an issue. So kind of depends on whether you're talking about single scope or not. That was an interesting question. Integrated ballistics calculator with lighting up POI on reticle seems like the move. Well, this already exists. There is a Swarovski DS, there is Burris Eliminator, there are a few, and every new generation gets better. There are other solutions. Mastech has a solution that adds it to more or less any LPVO. They should be out in the market fairly soon. So there are options out there, right? They already exist. Now, Swarovski DS has an amazing LRF integration, but it's a huge, heavy scope, probably a little bit larger than I want on a hunting rifle. Burris Eliminator, each generation gets better, but you still have some image degradation because of that transparent LCD screen in there and all that sort of stuff. But it does work quite nicely. Surprisingly nicely. I don't think it gets enough credit, to be honest with you. It's one of those things where people say, "Oh, it'll make people take unethical shots, etc." If you're a bad shot, it's not going to make you good. It's going to help you aim. You're still not a good shot. If you're already a competent shot, it will help you hit your target faster. It does not replace the fundamentals. It does not replace skills, knowledge, experience. But if you have an integrated laser rangefinder and a rifle scope that gives you an updated point of aim, and you're good enough in reading wind, it will help you shoot further, faster, if that makes sense. Okay. All right, what else we got? I've been eager to hear your thoughts on the Meopta LRF binos. How do they stack up in terms of value for the money? So it's a Meopta Optica LR 10x42. I've been lax with it. I need to issue a review, but I think I already added it to my list of recommendations. I think it's very good. The LRF is quite nice for hunting purposes, right? There are better LRFs out there, but it will range, larger things to a couple 1,000 yards. Probably will range D or something like that. If you're doing it off a tripod, probably to 1,000 or close to it, which is enough for my purposes. But as a binocular, it's actually quite good. So the next generation of Chinese OEM binoculars that are where integrating a laser rangefinder does not cause that much degradation in it as in terms of being in terms of overall binocular quality. So I can pretty comfortably recommend it. I think it's a very nicely made binocular. The same factory makes Optica LR 10x42 and likely Delta Titanium RF 9x45 as a configuration. I actually like the Delta's 9x45 a little bit more. It's a little bit better in low light, and slightly less magnification makes it a little bit easier for me to hold steady. 10x42 is not a configuration I like. I know it's the most popular configuration, but in terms of the optics I actually own for my own purposes, I do not. I have a couple of 10x42s that I use, to loan out to people and stuff. But I'm not. If with a 10 power binocular, I want a 50mm objective, basically. But aside from that, the Optica LR is very nice. Okay, all right. I think that's it for the questions. I'll take a breather for a moment. If any other questions come to mind about lightweight scopes, anything else, bring that up, and I will mute myself for a moment. I will be right back in just one sec. I am back. All right, no new questions came in. Oh, actually, never mind. So I missed that Mr. Tintle commented system overall, thermal not an option. I think I answered that. 3 to 15, 2 to 12, something like that, with an offset red dot, 40-ish millimeter objective. Front focal plane reticle, some sort of a tree reticle. If you can keep the weight in a 20-ounce range, it would be good. I'm not sure anything like that exists right now, but that would be ideal. Okay. All right. What else did I miss? I think I just caught the sip from the tumbler. Are you going for Scotch, bourbon, or rum tonight? Well, since nobody offered any guesses, this is a rye whiskey from Sonoma Distillery, Northern California. Surprisingly nice rye. I think you had a Citron S8 5 to 42 evaluate. Any thoughts about it? Yeah. Optomechanically, I thought it was very good. I did not like. Yeah, I had it with a tree reticle. I did not like that reticle. I actually shot a video through the scope, and I had to send it back. I sent it back, and I pulled up the video. It was all blurry. I screwed up with the focus, so I never published it. Citron. Citron is an interesting company. Optomechanically, the stuff they make is very good. But most of the people who design those scopes don't seem to be shooters. So the reticles for them are often, in my mind, questionable. Is it worth, they first introduced it for 3K. Is it worth 3K? In my opinion, no, it's not worth 3K. Then I saw it discounted around 2K. Is it worth 2K? Yeah, for 2K, optomechanical, it's awesome. It's a really nice scope. But there are two reticles in it. There is a 3 reticle, and then there is a regular meal scale reticle. I think the 3 reticle is a steaming pile of garbage. But the regular meal scale reticle is perfectly reasonable. So if you find a good deal on it and you don't need the 3 reticle, I think it is a good option. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, Mr. Ball Infinity says that my video started getting all choppy. Is anybody else seeing it, or is it just Mr. Infinity? Because on my end, everything is looking perfectly reasonable. Okay. Blind spotter. Would you use a scope as a spotter? Anything about the design of a spotter that makes it better for spotting versus a scope? So I use a scope as a spotter all the time. And with modern scopes that go to comparatively high magnification, I have a spotter living in the trunk of my car, and I very seldom use it, only if I'm shooting something low magnification. Scopes like the March 5-42, Tangent 5-25, etc., are sufficiently good where I don't really have a need for a spotting scope. Spotting scopes do not have an erector system in the classic sense of the word. Most spotting scopes do variable magnification very differently. It's a long objective lens with a prism system instead of the erector. And then the magnification is done by varying the focal length of the eyepiece. And if you do it that way, you can get, in principle, you can get better optical performance because you have much larger, longer focal length and comparatively more sophisticated objective lens. But in practical terms, at somewhat moderate magnifications, modern high-end rifle scopes are really, really good. And for me, for a lot of things that when I'm shooting alone at a range, that can easily replace a spotting scope, for looking bullet holes, stuff like that. Now, if I need to sit in glass, I usually do it with the binoculars. If I need to glass with a spotting scope, it will be much better than a rifle scope. Partly because of the apparent field of view, because spotting scopes have essentially a very, very short eye relief. And I should have a spotting scope here somewhere that I don't really see right now, but I know I have one here. If you give me a sec, I will try to locate it. I have no clue where there might be a spotting scope in this mess, but no matter. So notice that when you are looking through a spotting scope, there's very comparatively short eye relief. It's right here, right? What that does, it gives you much wider field of view at the same magnification. It also gives you much wider apparent field of view. When you're looking through a scope, because it needs longer eye relief, you're also seeing a lot of stuff around it, and your eye and brain have to discriminate between what you're seeing through the scope, what you're seeing around the scope, what's important, what's not important. With a short eye relief optic like a spotting scope, you have this huge immersive field of view. And what that does, it blocks out all the other stuff around it. So the apparent image quality with the same optical quality overall is going to be better through a spotting scope. But once again, if you're just occasionally looking at stuff and shooting reasonably high magnification, a rifle scope for many users replaces a spotter. Northern California arrival, wonders never cease. You'd think the protesters would have blocked all the trucks. Quite possible. Yeah, California is kind of a funny state. There is Los Angeles, where I used to live, which is basically a bastion of stupidity. There is the Bay Area, which is a high real estate value bastion of stupidity. There's San Diego. It's a little bit left wing, can go either way. Then there's the rest of the state. It's perfectly normal, like anywhere else, right? So, but California is a long and sad story. Okay, so apparently the video was choppy for a bit, but audio was fine. I do apologize. Something with a connection, probably. Okay, so multiple people saw it. From what I understand, due to increase in scope performance, modern military systems are going to dual scoped rifles instead of a spotter shooter pair. Complete novice here, read it on the web. I'm not so sure. There are still distinct advantages to having a spotter. Now, what we think of a spotter or spotting scope may be getting a lot more sophisticated. There's a lot of stuff coming through available to the military that is much more than just regular spotting scope that introduces a variety of fused things with a spotter and thermal and night vision, all sorts of other stuff. But I don't think, for military purposes, a rifle scope is going to be replacing some sort of a observation device, dedicated observation device, anytime soon. Could be wrong. If you find that article, send it my way. I'm curious. All right, let's see. What did I miss? As far as lightweight scopes go, I think I reasonably covered it. All right, I'll have a sip of the magic potion. And unless you guys have other questions, I'll talk a little bit about SunwayFoto. How far along are we? About an hour and a half. And then we'll be wrapping things up. So how many of you know of a company called SunwayFoto? Anyone? Anyone at all? That's actually an interesting question. Mr. Rick Hamby. Your spotter is supposed to watch your backside. Yes, among other things. So if you're talking about the typical sniper team, and once again, I'm not an authority on sniper teams. There are plenty of people there who know a ton more of it because they've served in those units. I haven't. A spotter does a lot of different things. One of them is kind of keeps an eye on the shooter, but frequently the spotter, it would be, from a shooting standpoint at least, would be the more experienced guy on the team because he's a guy who's calling wind, identifying targets, making decisions. The guy with the long-range rifle, his primary purpose many times is just to pull on the trigger the right way. Not to belittle that, it's hell better than I can do. But the spotter, very commonly, right, the sniper will have this long-range bolt gun, and the spotter these days will have some sort of a semi-automatic, essentially designated marksman rifle and observation optics and stuff like that. And the designated marksman rifle can actually cover, not quite to the range of a long-range bolt gun, but to a few hundred yards, 800-900 yards, fairly comfortably, and do so accurately and do so quickly, because that would be an accurate semi-automatic. Okay. All right. I asked the question, how many of you guys have heard of SunwayFoto? And I did not get any answers. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that either you have not heard of SunwayFoto or you are doing some feverishly quick Google search. I'm not going to give you the whole background on the company, partly because I have no clue what their background is. But my day job used to be in the photo video world. I used to develop image sensors and for broadcast movie cameras and stuff like that. For in the photography world, SunwayFoto has been a big deal for quite a long time. So there are a few Chinese companies. I think they're actually based in Hong Kong, but they manufacture in China. One is SunwayFoto, another one is LeoFoto, and we know LeoFoto because they make tripods for, well, their own, and they make tripods for Vortex, and they make tripods for Athlon. I had an Athlon here, actually. Oh, there we go. There it is. I see it. Hold on. So Athlon came out with a whole line of really nice heavy-duty tripods. This is the heaviest one. That's a 40 millimeter. And this sucker is substantial. But this is OEM by LeoFoto, LeoFoto. LeoFoto decided to get into the shooting world because, guys who shoot will pay a lot of money for a nicely sturdy tripod. And because the available options from American companies like Really Right Stuff and things like that are quite expensive. Now SunwayFoto, which is basically competes against them, is getting into this whole thing as well. So I was curious, and I got my hands on some of their stuff, and they're basically trying to introduce a whole line of shooting-oriented products. I did not go for the beefiest because I have an application right now for something that's not too heavy. This is the 3240Q tripod. Let's see if you guys can see it well. Kind of a nice greenish color, the color I actually like. Carbon fiber tubes, lever locks on the legs. Well, we'll talk about that in a moment. I actually like that for many purposes. And a very, very low profile ball head. Ball head is 38 millimeters. There's a locking lever that works quite nicely. And there is in this case, there is an Arca clamp up top, but they have other clamps that can do Arca and Picatinny and stuff like that. Kind of an interesting design. This whole thing as is weighs about 4 pounds, so it's a little bit heavier than a tripod I use for hunting, but it's reasonable. So a friend of mine is going to be hunting with me fairly soon. I'm going to be doing the Spartan Precision stuff, and I'm going to loan him this tripod so that he can check it out. I will say this. I only got this about a week ago, so I don't have all of the input. There are still a couple of things they did because they're just silly because nobody who designed these things really understands shooting. They'll learn as they go along. But the manufacturing quality actually looks very good. Is it as good in terms of manufacturing quality as, let's say, Really Right Stuff? Maybe not, but it's really up there. I mean, I'm looking at the machining. I'm looking at the quality of the clamp. Like it's not like the clamp on RRS, but it's close. And RRS is, the best feeling clamp in the world, whatever it is. It's a really nice lever, but this one is smooth, locks everything up tight. I did quite a lot of shooting with this thing. It worked surprisingly nicely. One of the things that's sort of interesting, so most shooting tripods utilize these collars. Use it on this thing. That's a big ass tripod. This rotating thing to lock the leg. That works really well. And if you want a super heavy duty tripod, these these collars, you can lock it down really, really tight. However, for most of my application, given a choice, I actually prefer the levers. They can't hold it quite as tight, but it seems to be tight enough for my purposes when I'm talking about this leg locking levers. But what it gives me, immediate visual identification whether the leg is locked down or not. I can't tell you how many times when I was really in a rush trying to lock those collars, I screwed something up and I ended up with one leg collapsing a little bit on me, which was just annoying as hell. Okay. Let's see what else from SunwayFoto. Yeah, so the tripod, she looks pretty good, works pretty well. There's also, of course, kind of an interesting thing. All of the Chinese OEM companies do this. LeoFoto does it. SunwayFoto does it. The way they attach the Arca clamp to this protrusion from the ball, it introduces some wobble because for photography it's fine. For shooting, it's not. They will all have to learn. I fed back my input to Athlon, and I'll do the same thing with SunwayFoto. There is an easy fix for that, but it's not bad. It's reasonable. They make a clamp. I was using that earlier today. That's if you guys saw my YouTube short. This is the clamp that the Anschutz rifle was sitting in. This is nice and smooth, machined pretty well. There are some machining marks I see in a kind of difficult spot, but everything is smooth and moves nicely. And one of the nice things, everything comes very nicely optioned. For example, the Arca plate here is detachable and it came with 2 different heights. This is a short one. There's also thicker ones depending on which tripod you use it on. One maybe better than the other. This little Picatinny to Arca clamp actually works really well, and we just had a discussion. Can you use a rifle scope as a spotter? Well, if you bought a really nice rifle scope, you don't have money to buy a fancy spotter, you want to be able to take off your rifle scope, put it in a tripod and use it as a spotter, this is what you need. Put this on an Arca type. Put this on an Arca type clamp. Put your rifle scope on it and use it as a spotter to your heart's content. The tripod came with a couple adapter plates, the regular one for 1/4-20 and the M-lock. So they clearly studied the shooting market quite a bit and accessorized it very nicely. For example, I have a one-piece mount and a couple of sets of rings, so I don't like very much. It's a 1913 clamp, but okay. It should work fine with most rails. A couple that I've tried it with worked fine. But all of both the rings and the single piece mount come with this wedge type a leveling mechanism. Okay. So that's kind of a nice touch. It's not that expensive. I wish more companies would do it now. It makes it easier to level scope and things. Another thing I got from them is this inverted ball head. It's same basic idea as Really Right Stuff's anvil head. This one is called IB30. Lever locks it. Very nice smooth lever. And another lever locks the clamp. And this one can do both Arca and Picatinny. So I haven't yet decided which tripod I'm going to put this on, but I haven't really tested it yet. It feels nice. I haven't tested it under recoil. So where does all this SunwayFoto stuff fit in? It looks to be very well made and it's clearly cheaper than the US made options. Whether you want to buy stuff from a Chinese company or not, it's entirely up to you. I'm here to deliver what I think of the quality of the product. And so far, I'm sort of cautiously optimistic. Build quality, machining quality, finish quality, all looks good. All the controls are smooth. Everything is marked correctly. There are a couple of things where I don't think they understand the shooting application all that well. But I've seen Chinese companies try to jump into this and really screw things up. These guys are not demonstrating any particularly significant screw-ups. Couple of minor gaps in knowledge, but for example, this business between 1913 and STANAG clamps, I've been talking about it for a couple of years now. Most experienced shooters in the US don't understand the difference either, right? Many do. I've run into quite a few people who do, but many don't. So I'm not really surprised that the Chinese photo company that decided to make products for this would not necessarily know either. However, the finish and engineering quality and machining quality, what I'm seeing so far is very good. So I'm sort of cautiously optimistic. It should become a very good option for people who are willing to spend reasonable money, but can't afford the really high-end stuff like the Really Right Stuff or Field Optics Research, things like that. Spartan Precision, those really are going to cost you money. As you go down, it's nice to have something between the really fancy US-made stuff and the absolute crap that's all over Amazon and eBay. This stuff is far from crap. It is well made, and price-wise, just like the Photo or Athlon, it sits kind of halfway between the ultra fancy stuff and the cheap stuff, and it seems to work well. And I will, of course, let you know as I keep testing this. You'll see me shoot with this more, and if anything breaks, I will let you know. Okay. Oh, Mr. Paul M. Thank you, sir. I really appreciate your support. Derek, Mr. Northwest Guns is here. Good evening, sir. You popped on just as I'm getting ready to wrap up. Paul, this has been one of your best presentations, in my humble opinion. Lots of good info provided in a manner that's easy to understand. Well done, sir. Thank you. I really do appreciate it. I try. I don't always succeed. So there are a couple of questions here that I think I missed. Eric Hamby on the dual scope setup. Correct. That's why I don't understand the dual scope setup here. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. So Lee, if you can find that article, that reference that talked about dual scope setup, replacing spotters, please send it to me. I think you have my email address. I'd be very curious. It'll make for a nice discussion during the next live stream. Well, that's actually a good question. Mr. Blind Spotter, who is on a run today, sure are on fire. That's a really good question. I think we could transition back to half mil graduated reticles for less clutter, hold in between lines for quarter mil holds. Thoughts? There are reticles like that. It really depends on the distance and on the scope magnification. If the scope goes out to 10 or 12 power, 0.2 mil holds don't really do much for me. I can use them on 12 power or so. At 12 power, I think there is already enough separation between different lines where it's not that cluttered. But on FFP scopes that top out to 10 to 12 power, I sort of prefer just stay with 0.5s and be done with it. I think that's enough. As we go to high magnifications, I like 0.2s because as you start shooting further out, 0.2 milliradian becomes, as you translate it into linear distance, becomes pretty significant. And where it is most useful for me, other than just holding the right way in correcting for wind, right? So when I'm shooting plates, or well, shooting anything really, and if I miss, it's very nice for me to be able to quickly evaluate by how much I missed. And these 0.2 milliradian dot, right? For example, some of my favorite simple tree style reticles that have 0.2 milliradian graduations, the 0.2s are arguably more useful in figuring out how much I need to correct than necessarily for holding, for actual holds, right? If I'm aiming, I can interpolate things fairly well, and we're all really, really good in finding the middle of something. So you're right, 0.25 would be easy to find. But what would be difficult is figuring out how much to correct for. So I would like to see, on lower magnification front focal plane scopes, I would definitely like to see people do these sparse tree reticles, and several low power variables have been doing it. Schmidt's MDRT6 is excellent. There are several others. And the reticle in this Black Hound Emerge that I want to look at, that should be heading my way, is I think one of those kind of a sparse tree reticle, not too busy, which is good given the magnification range. As you get up to 15 power or even a little bit higher, a little bit more detail in the reticle is not bad. If it's a 3 to 15 or something, I can go either way. As we get higher than 15, I really like reticles based on the 0.2 milliradian spacing, really to a significant degree, because it allows me to see my misses and make corrections, or when I'm spotting for somebody else, to be able to evaluate corrections in a more intelligent way. Okay. But for example, the scope that I'm supposed to be getting this Black Hound Emerge 2 to 12 and Burris XTR 3i 3.3 to 18 by 50. If one of those shows up early enough, I'll put it on my hunting rifle and hunt with it this season. But if they don't, the scope that's currently on my 8.6 Blackout that I'm setting up for hunting is the Tangent 8 at 3 to 15 by 50 with a prehistoric Gen 2 XR reticle. And if those other scopes don't show up in time for me to set everything up, I will be hunting with the Gen 2 XR that's based on 0.5 milliradian graduations, and I will not feel shortchanged by it in the slightest, I guarantee it. Okay. All right, what else we got? Okay. Tripod mounted large binoculars as a spotter with less eye strain. That happens all the time. If I'm doing extended glassing, I virtually never do it with a spotter. Like I said, I'm going to go mule deer and elk hunting in November, and I'm not going to take a spotter with me. Probably maybe I'll keep it in the car just in case. But I have 10 power to 15 power binoculars. And if I'm going to go just glassing, first I'm going to go with a friend of mine who has a tag, and I'll just keep him company. It's in the same area where I'll be hunting 2 weeks later. So that's sort of my scouting trip. So when I go there, honestly, I will probably take, so my normal glassing binoculars at 10 by 50 Vortex Razor UHD, which I really like. And that's pretty much going to be what I do most of my glassing with. And I might also bring with me, I have a 15 by 56 binocular from Tract, which I will like quite a lot. And when I'm going to be with my friend, so he's going to be shooting if we find something, I might bring the 15 power with me for more extended range glassing as well, since I will not be carrying a rifle. But 15 or 18 power binocular instead of a spotter is very, very commonly used for out west here for longer distances, and it really helps with eye strain. For example, when I went on that sheep hunt, was it a year and a half ago, maybe a little more now? I know. So all the guys, everybody was glassing with binoculars, most of them anywhere between 12 and 15 power. And the guide that was with us, he had a really fancy Swarovski spotter. He only pulled out the spotter when he found a particular ram that he wanted to look at the horns a little bit more careful. Then he'd pull out the spotter and look. So the ratio of time spent with a large binocular versus spotter was probably 20 to 1. So, all right. Do you have any experience hunting with solid copper bullet? I found Warner Tool Company made some for target shooting too, and I wonder if they can double duty. So I have quite a lot of experience with solid copper bullets. There are many good ones. If it is designed for target shooting, it's not designed for hunting. Most of the solid copper bullets for target shooting do not expand. They will basically go right through the animal, make a very small hole. My arguably favorite solid copper bullet for hunting is the Bulldozer 2 from Badlands Precision. But all of the major manufacturers make them. I've had very good luck with Barnes tipped TSX. I think I shot a pig with one, and I know many people who had really, really good luck with them. Many serious hunters that I know pretty much swear by expanding solid copper bullets, subsonic or supersonic, because they do a lot of damage and make a large exit hole, so you have an easy to track blood trail and stuff like that. So given a choice, I prefer to hunt with actually a solid copper bullet. Okay. There we go. Mr. Northwest Guns goes. Look at hammer bullets for hunting. They're really good. I'm not familiar with the hammer bullets, but I suspect that Derek knows what he's talking about. Mr. Leetonto. I'm going on memory, but from what I remember, it had to do with the fast follow-up shots by the spotter before the target could react to a miss by the primary shooter. So that's a very specific situation, and that's one of the reasons why oftentimes these days you'll have a two-person team. There will be a long-range precision rifle and then a designated marksman rifle that can't reach quite that far out, but fairly far out, and that would allow for rapid follow-up. For rapid follow-up shots. I don't think that replaces a spotter. It's sort of a situational thing. And there we go. The very next comment. Now that I think about it, it probably was situational with medium to close range engagements. Exactly. Yeah, absolutely correct. What is the advantage of 1 or 1.5x compared to 2x for thermal clip-on? Well, it depends on which thermal clip-on you have. Many commercial thermal clip-ons, they match the day scope magnification around 2 power or a little bit under. It just depends on which clip-on you have. The one I use most of the time is a Burris BTC 50. which has equivalent magnification about 2.7, something like that. But there are quite a few out there, like a Steiner C35 and quite a few others that have equivalent matching field of views with day scope set around 2 power. So going down to around 2 or thereabouts is conducive for effective use with thermals. Going down to 1 doesn't give you all that much, but going down to 1.5 covers probably 95% of all commercially available thermal clip-ons. Okay. All right, and we actually got to the last question. All right, guys, I usually try to keep these under 2 hours, which is kind of a shame since Direct Northwest Guns just joined us. But we have 10-15 minutes. If you have any other questions, now's the time to cover it. I've sort of the 3 things I wanted to talk about, I think I covered in reasonable detail. If you have any questions about that or anything else, now's the time. Okay. So I'm going to quickly glance to the comments, see if I missed anything. And if I did not miss anything, and if you guys don't have anything else that comes to mind, I will start slowly wrapping up. Oh, I think I got everything. Okay. All right. I think I captured more or less everything. So to give you, thanks for the excellent discussion. You're very welcome. So to give you a couple of timelines, I'm trying to figure out when I'd be able to do this next. That's actually an interesting question. Is there the risk that having a bigger eye box will increase the chance of parallax since your eyes are not centered? On low magnification, in theory, yes. In practice, if you have a side focus and everything's probably set up, no, not really. Okay. Have you used Strilock Pro for Muzzleloader? I have not. I do have Strilock Pro, and I've pretty much only used it a few times, and I wanted to generate a nice picture of the reticle. But aside from that, I don't really use Strilock Pro. I have not had very good luck with it, and I intensely dislike the interface, and the way the atmospheric inputs work, it's almost always wrong for me. It's like I said, I can only get it to work if I just figure out the correct density altitude and just put that in, and sort of gets close. I primarily, this app that I use most of the time, and that's working comparatively well for me, is GeoBallistics. Works well for me. I've had quite good luck with that. There's another one called Microballistics, kind of a funky interface, but the math works well. The best overall is the ballistic engine that David Tubb uses, but there is no good app other than for his DTR reticle, and that's a little bit different. Okay, scope recommended. I'm not entirely sure what you mean. Does it mean what kind of scope I recommend for muzzle loaders? Because that's kind of really depends on the muzzle loader. So my muzzle loader is modern and it shoots far away with very pointy bullets. So last year I used the 1.5 to 8 by 32 scope on it successfully, but I felt that for the distances out here where you might even be using even a muzzle loader, you need a little bit more. And so I switched. The scope that's currently on my muzzle loader is a tracked 2.5 to 15 by 44, and I think for the distances we have here and for long range muzzle loaders, that's a better option. But if you have a muzzle loader doesn't go quite that far. Mine shoots a very pointy 275 grain bullet, about 2,400 foot per second. It's a legitimate 300-400 yard muzzle loader. If you're shooting a little closer, I mean, a moderate magnification scope like a 1.5 to 8, 1.5 to 6, 1.5 to 9 would probably be a very good option. All right, Mr. Chen. I noticed March includes an objective reducer from 42 to 30 millimeter and set on highest magnification. It will reduce about 50% of the light and 50% more depth of field. Why aren't other people offering that as an accessory? March first became popular from F-class and all sorts of other target shooting competitions, which are done during the day where they have a lot of light. So for them, when you throttle down the objective, it controls stray light better, gives you better depth of field, the target looks nicer. And you are shooting, from a very, very steady shooting position where your exit pupil becomes very small, but because you're at a very steady shooting position, it's not really a big deal, and there is plenty of light. For many other traditional shooting applications with less stable shooting positions, weird field stuff, compromised lighting, having an aperture reducer doesn't do shit for you. There have been others here and there. It's not, it used to be more common than it is now. There used to be some aftermarket ones and stuff like that. But March does this because these are commonly used for F-class bench rest, that kind of stuff. In other disciplines, people usually don't want to give up the amount of light they have. Okay. So on 1.5 to 15 by 42, probably because they offer it on a bunch of other stuff and they just automatically offered it on this scope as well. I don't know if I'd be necessarily itching to use it on that scope. All right, guys, a few more minutes. What else you got? Thanks. You're very welcome. Thanks, Ilya. I've missed the intelligent discussion. Have a great night. You're very welcome. It's good to have you here again, and thank you for stopping by. So I started thinking a little bit about schedules. So let me pull up a calendar. So next week is a no-go. I have some travel and a few other things. My brother turns a round number. So next week is a no-go. The week after, we'll see. So the week afterwards is when I'm hoping to head out into the boonies with a friend of mine. He's got a muzzleloader mule deer hunt, so he's going to be using my muzzleloader. And if I come back early enough from that, I'm going to try to do another live stream 2 weeks from now. And if not, it may be another week later. Then my own mule deer hunt is 12th through 16th. And I need to squeeze in an elk hunt somewhere in there. So November might end up being a little sparse. I do apologize for that, but we'll see. Oh, that's interesting. Did you see that Tech Ops KWM possible collaboration? No, I have not. I have no idea what that is. Let me look it up real quick. Tech Ops KWM. I have no idea what that is. Not a clue. I'm not sure what is Tech Ops KWM. I don't know. Please clarify. If you have a link, that would be good. Mr. Blind Spotter, when are you starting your optics company? We need some better designs on the market. I don't know, guys. When I don't have to work for a living, that would be fun. Given how many optics companies are out there now, and I suspect in 5 years there will be not quite as many. Quite a few will go out of business due to competition. I would much rather collaborate with some existing companies, and there are a few collaborations happening as they go live. At SHOT Show, you'll see one or two, and there may be others. I prefer to try to collaborate with existing companies who already have relations with OEMs and see what we can get going with them. I think that is a faster and more efficient way for me to get some of my ideas out there. You also have to keep in mind that a lot of things that make sense to me, that I like, that I would like to push through, they don't necessarily have mass market appeal, right? You have to keep in mind the fact that you guys are here listening to all of my ramblings puts you in a comparatively small minority of people who actually want to understand how this stuff works. But that is a minority, right? I have a strong suspicion that the larger part of the shooting market just wants to be told what to get and they'll go get it. And this is how all these YouTube influencers and all that sort of stuff, they function. Many of them are sponsored by different companies so that they can make a particular recommendation and people go buy it and tell their friends it's the bestest, etc. And I don't do it that way. It does not make me Mr. Popular, and I'm okay with it. It puts likely a significant disadvantage in terms of how large of an audience I'm going to get, right? And I'm okay with it. I like the audience I have. It's growing slowly, but once again, this is nothing that I do here has all that much mass market appeal. So the corollary of that likely is that if I start an optics company, it might not have mass market appeal either. So I'd much rather collaborate with somebody else, at least at this stage. Okay, what else we have? I saw Will had got relation with Vortex and probably shot the Razor 6 to 36 quite a bit so far. Is it possible to have him on the live sometime? Yeah, I'm chatting with Will here and there. He's sponsored by ZComp, but he has spent a lot of time comparing 6 to 36 to other stuff. He's been sort of busy. I'll chat with him and see. Once the hunting season is more or less behind us, I'll try to bring him on. I will definitely bring him on after SHOT Show. So he will goes to SHOT Show with me to help me with some photography and some precision stuff. And after SHOT Show, I really like to have him join me so that we can go over our impressions and stuff like that. Last year we tried it multiple times, got sidetracked every time, but finally got it through. But I know he had a chance to compare the Razor Gen 3 to a bunch of other stuff, and you're right, I should have him on so we can talk about it. How do you feel about Black Hound so far? I remember they don't really reach out to people for marketing. And did you buy the Black Hound 2 to 12 yourself? So they don't really reach out to people for marketing, probably. I ran into them at SHOT Show. So when I first ran into Black Hound, I think 3-4 years ago, I thought there were a bunch of snake oil salesmen. There was a guy there who was a complete dick. And I basically ignored them. He was peddling cheap crap and he was telling me some weird ass stories, trying to bullshit me shamelessly. He didn't know what he was talking about, couldn't tell his ass from an elbow. So I sort of wrote off Black Hound completely. Then fast forward a couple of years after COVID, I go to Black Hound and completely different team, completely different booth, completely different scopes. Well, some scopes were different, some same new ones were different. And I thought that was interesting. And I went and chatted with their director of marketing. They seem to have known who I am. Which by itself is kind of odd because, like I said, I don't exactly have a lot of mass market appeal. But I kind of liked it. They didn't try to bullshit me. They tried to do the right thing. The designs looked more coherent. So I stayed in touch with them, and I told them that was, I think, last year's SHOT Show, so earlier this year. SHOT Show 2022. I looked over what they had. It looked like they were putting things together in an intelligent manner. And I told them that this particular scope is something I'd like to review when they have one available. Since then, Black Hound got purchased by Riton. Now they are owned by the same person, but they are kept as separate companies. And they had, everything was kind of slow, and they finally have one available. And they said they want me to review it. I gave them my usual spiel, as in, if I like it, it'll be good, and if I don't like it, you will not enjoy my review. And they said all we want is an honest review, so I'll take it. So they're sending me one. It's not here yet. when it shows up, I'll let you know. And I did not purchase it. They're sending it to me, which makes it different from every other scope I review. So, and Mr. Jesse, thank you for your input. That scope tunneling formula really helped my MPVO purchase. Oh yeah, I remember that. That was on my website. You're very welcome. Absolutely, these are the kind of questions where I'm always happy to help. All right, guys, we're at exactly 2 hours, so I'm going to wrap up at this point. Thank you all for being here with me. Thank you for the good questions. This is interesting. And the good questions is what makes it all worthwhile. If there's anything I missed, or if there's anything that requires a follow-up, please visit darklordofoptics.com, post your question there, or do so in the comments under this video. If it's posted on YouTube, it may be a little bit longer for me to get to it, but I do try to get to everything. If it's on my website and on locals on darklordofoptics.com, that I visit very regularly. Once again, thank you all for being here, and good night.